I do think there are legitimate reasons for people to be quite annoyed at the moment about the state of crime and the state of policing. So although violence is falling, stabbings are falling, I think a lot of crimes that are very visible, so things like shoplifting, things like graffiti, those are clearly rising in some shape or form. And I think it's quite interesting that although the sort of more serious crimes may be falling, people are being exposed to more kind of day-to-day crimes, which I think erodes their faith in the sort of their faith in the public realm. Really.
We talked earlier this week about the mismatch between what people think about crime and the reality of it. Well, a study found we tend to think crime is worse than it is. So let's get the most up-to-date information. Knife crime stats for England and Wales have come out in the last 10 minutes. Tom Calver is data editor at The Times and The Sunday Times and joins us in the studio. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Tell us what we've learnt then.
Well, look, this is just one slice of the crime picture, but it's figures from the MOJ that are published every few months, and they show 20,800 knife and offensive weapon offences in the year to March 2026. Now, this is a slight fall from last year. It's up since that kind of COVID low, but broadly, things haven't really changed all that much statistically. There's a few things to pick out that I think are worth talking about, though. So one is that the sentence length is creeping upwards slightly, and I think this is kind of a longer-term trend where increasingly there's more public pressure to put sentence lengths up, which in turn is leading to overcrowding in prisons and all of those other problems we've been discussing. The other thing I think is interesting is that we're seeing a rise in repeat offenders. So although the number of overall knife crimes is held steady or has fallen slightly over the past year or so, the number of repeat offenders has risen. So now 33% of all people who commit a knife crime offence have had a previous conviction, and that's up from 25% a decade ago. So I think that the pattern of offending a knife crime has changed. But this is just one slice of the data, and this covers, this is official figures that are reported to police. There are other bits of data that show a similar picture, even a more optimistic picture than this. So the NHS records cases where someone has been admitted with a stabbing injury. Those have luckily fallen, so from 5,000 a few years ago to 3,000. So things are sort of easing off in that way. But this is just one slice, but it shows a slight fall in violence.
So we tried to grapple with this. I mean, your job is all about looking at the data, trying to find the evidence in the sums and in the numbers. How difficult, Tom, is it actually to say we know to what extent knife crime is rising or declining in the United Kingdom? You've said it's one slice. There are so many different things. We know so much crime is underreported. How do we get a genuine picture, do you think?
It's virtually impossible, to be honest. I think, you have to take all of this data with a pinch of salt. I think there's all kinds of problem with data collection in this country at the moment. And also, I think the problem is as well, we had about 10, 15 years ago, the police changed how they record crime, which basically meant that all of a sudden, say there was a stabbing, but also the person who did the stabbing said some offensive language. Previously, they would just count the stabbing, whereas now they have to count all these other different crimes as well. And the changes to counting rules like this led to a big increase in reported crime, which I think made things look like things were getting much more dangerous at the time, even if that wasn't actually the case. So we have to use all these different data points to try and figure out what's actually happening.
Would you agree with the sentiment that we think crime is worse than it actually is in reality?
Yes, I think it is human nature to think that things are worse. However, I do think, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently, I do think there are legitimate reasons for people to be quite annoyed at the moment about the state of crime and the state of policing. So although violence is falling, stabbings are falling, I think a lot of crimes that are very visible, so things like shoplifting, things like graffiti, those are clearly rising in some shape or form. And I think it's quite interesting that although the sort of more serious crimes may be falling, people are being exposed to more kind of day-to-day crimes, which I think erodes their faith in the sort of their faith in the public realm. Really,
that's what they said of those survey. The one crime that has gone up is shoplifting.
Yeah. And also on social media, people can wind each other up more about crime than they could have done 20 years ago, when it would just be whether they chose to talk about it in the pub or not. And that will have an impact on how they perceive these things.
Definitely. I mehave there were so many crimes that would have happened 20, 30 years ago that we just didn't see. And now we see pretty much, if there's a serious incident, you can bet that someone will have their phone out and we will see it.
What about the inference about prisons? I'm just this may be because I have this view, and there's confirmation bias is a real problem in all this. You have a political view, you see this all the time with crime. Whatever your political view is, London is a dump, London is wonderful, you find statistics that fit your view. If sentences are going up and recidivism is going up, can we not reasonably conclude that the current system, the current prison system, the current way we use the prison system isn't performing its primary function, which is to stop and reduce crime happening in the future?
Well, look, Britain has one of the highest reoffending rates in the world. We are really, really bad at rehabilitating offenders. And yeah, I think that the problem is politicians have been sort of trapped in this cycle where we have to give harsher and harsher sentences. There's this common idea that sentences are getting tougher because we hear stories about early release, and we hear, and yes, that is, there are individual cases where you think, hang on, that doesn't feel right. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, offences, sentence lengths are getting longer over time, and this causes a huge problem for prisons, because contrary to popular opinion, prisons aren't full of people who have been tapped on the wrist for stealing or shoplifting or whatever. They're full of long-term offenders, people who've been there for a very long time. That's what's clogging up the prison system at the moment.
Tom, thank you so much for your time. Tom Calver, the data editor for The Times and The Sunday Times, trying to read through the data that is available to give us the very best picture on what is happening with knife crime in England.
We could talk about all these sort of things for a long time.
We could, yes.